day in Manhattan, clear as could be, till the planes hit the buildings and changed history. They stood for an hour once the damage was done, but then suddenly crumbled. 10 seconds they were gone. There were cascading projections of steel into dust. Looked like explosions, but it was not discussed. So I turned off the TV and shut out the lights. It's all just illusion, right in front of my eyes. Well, I'm not scared of dying. We're all bound for heaven, just sharing the truth about 9/11.
Okay, I ended that real quick so we could have more time for roll-ins today. We had an event happen here in Portland, Oregon on Tuesday at Reynolds High School. We had a shooting. One person was killed and one person was suicided. I guess that's about the same thing as far as dead is concerned. But the news media came out right away and started describing his AR-15, which is a semi-automatic rifle. They started describing that as an assault rifle. It's not an assault rifle. Nobody assaults with a semi-automatic weapon of any kind. I mean, maybe in their holster, pistol, sidearm, but if they have a rifle, it's going to be fully auto if it's an assault rifle. Otherwise, it's just a semi-automatic rifle, nothing more than a deer rifle with, fancy plastic on it. So it's, they're laying the groundwork. I turned to a friend of mine when we were seeing the news event unwind, and I said, you watch, this is going to be another brand new call, just like every other one, for more gun control. Nobody wants to know anything about whether the shooter was on drugs or whether he was had mental problems or anything. The best that I could come up with all the research I've done is, in some of the blogs, people are saying if the parents knew he had mental problems and they let the guns be available, I mean, he defeated the safety systems. Yeah, he pulled the safety pin out of the hasp. I don't know what it was, but anyway, the point is, they don't care what the cause was. They don't want to have any sort of remedial action. They want to fight the symptom. The symptom is that somebody starts shooting. The way you solve the symptom is take away the gun. But don't even think about what the guy's going to do if he can't shoot. What's he going to do next? Stab? The last shooting we had that made, popular news was, 3 people were shot with a gun and 3 people were stabbed with a knife. And you didn't hear any call go up for making knives illegal or collecting knives or registering knives or making a carry permit for knives, although I think carry permit does apply to that. Anyway, neither here nor there. So let's watch this little, it's under 2 minutes, a little clip here about the shooting from Russia Today.
In high school yesterday has the country reeling over yet another tragedy spurred by a gun in the hands of a teenager. Police say the suspect, 15-year-old Jared Michael Paget, had an assault rifle, handgun, and several magazines when he opened fire at a gym at Reynolds High School in Troutdale. Police say an autopsy determined that Paget died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound after the attack. One student, 14-year-old Emilio Hoffman, was killed in the boys' locker room. The incident in Oregon marks the 74th shooting on a school campus since the December 2012 mass shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, and the 37th school shooting so far in 2014. These numbers are coming from Everytown for Gun Safety and Gun Control Advocacy Group, and these numbers may even be low since they are compiled from media reports, which may not cover every incident. Of the 74 shootings on the list, 35 took place at a college or university, and 39 occurred in K through 12 schools. The incidents are reported across 31 states. This map shows the locations of the incidents, with some arrows representing sites of multiple shootings. Topping the list is Atlanta, Georgia, which saw 10 shootings on school campuses in the last year and a half. Rounding out the top 5 were Florida, Tennessee, North Carolina, and California. Not all of these shootings, however, are mass shootings, and not every incident results in death or injury. Every town identifies a school shooting as when a firearm was discharged inside a school building or on school or campus grounds, as documented in publicly reported news accounts. President Obama tried to pass gun control legislation after the shootings at Newtown, but a watered-down version of the bill failed to become the law.
Okay, well, so much for that. You notice they're counting 74 of them just since last December or whatever. But when you factor that into 360 million people in this country, it's a tiny, tiny fraction. And, you know, thousands of people die every year from cars, and they don't ban cars. Even the ones that were driven deliberately up on the sidewalk and killed 6 and injured 20, if you recall that one. Well, anyway, we just had a first. Edward Snowden got a live TV interview here in the United States, NBC. But NBC didn't want to play fair when Edward Snowden started talking about 9/11. So let's listen in on what happened. This is the part that NBC censored. Go ahead.
Well, NBC Nightly News scored the first ever Edward Snowden interview for American television viewers. And how did they honor that? Well, by censoring out his controversial statements that counter the agenda. Now, Snowden's comments were, of course, surrounding the failure of dragnet surveillance to stop the 9/11 attacks. He censored, his words were censored from the primetime broadcast and instead were buried in an hour-long clip on NBC's website. Snowden revealed that thanks to the NSA, we did indeed have all the information we needed to stop these terrorist attacks, but we didn't, and here's why.
The CIA knew who these guys were. The problem was not that we weren't collecting information. It wasn't that we didn't have enough dots. It wasn't that we didn't have a haystack. It was that we did not understand the haystack that we have.
Now, Snowden also talked about the fact that the government knew about the Boston Marathon bombers before that attack happened as well, because Russian intelligence gave them the names of the alleged bombers. But of course, we didn't stop that either. Now, of course, those comments were cut from primetime viewers as well, but it's not surprising that his comments were cut because he also had this to say.
It's really disingenuous for the government to invoke and sort of scandalize our memories, to sort of exploit the national trauma that we all suffered together and worked so hard to come through, to justify programs that have never been shown to keep us safe, but cost us liberties and freedoms that we don't need to give up, and our Constitution says we should not give up.
But giving up the gift of this mass surveillance is not even on the table, because it never was about catching terrorists. It is about surveilling all the rest of us.
The globalists have controlled the mainstream media for a long time, but now they're expanding, making the weaponization even more vicious and deceptive. All the major networks are state-run.
We are partnering this year with the NF.
Thank you. You're not supposed to play the commercials. You know that. Anyway, okay, we're going to go on to the next step here. Since we're talking about Edward Snowden, we just had, well, just last month, another NSA whistleblower came forward, and he had some interesting things to say. For one thing, he said that Edward Snowden didn't have access to the good files, like he didn't get anything on 9/11, for instance. And but he did go on to say that the NSA, just like J. Edgar Hoover, only far more equipped to do it, they're blackmailing everybody. They're wiretapping Supreme Court justices, they're wiretapping Congress people, on and on like that. Are you guys ready to play that one? Just about. Just a little bit. We're starting partway down the clip, so they have to find a spot. But the deal here is, what is information and what is disinformation? Who is playing whom? One, you know, I played a cut from Dr. Steve Pieczenik, who is the collaborator with Tom Clancy on those spy novels, and he claims that Edward Snowden is nothing more than an avatar set up to control the narrative and, you know, let out stuff that people want to see, but not stuff that they really want to see. Okay, well, they're ready to go. So this is a whistleblower revealing blackmail and Snowden leaks. So this is about 10 minutes.
Friday, after our show, Paul Joseph Watson had a report. An economist says that U.S. banks are preparing to charge customers for deposits. Now, this was earlier in the week. We told you that the European Central Bank was going to start doing negative interest rates for the banks there, of course. In other words, charging them for money that they had on deposit. Now, of course, if they're going to do that to the banks, you know that the banks are going to push that along, plus add additional fees to that for their own customers. It's just a matter of time. But Paul, in the article, quoted a couple of economists here in the United States that point out that, of course, it's inevitable that's going to come to the United States as well. Question is when and in what form? In the article, he says banks in the EU have not indicated whether or not the costs will be passed on to consumers, but the New York Times' Neil Irwin says it's inevitable. He says they're going to pass on these negative interest rates to consumers, or at least try to. They may do so probably not by explicitly charging them interest rates. In other words, they're not going to put an item, they're not going to say that they're going to give you a negative interest rate. That would just annoy people, of course. They're going to be much more subtle about it. They're going to add new fees, or they're going to increase the amount of account maintenance fees. That's always been the case in the past. Just look at how your bank fees have escalated. We ought to do an article about that. We ought to go in and look at the escalating charges for every service that the banks provide. But then he also quotes another economist, Martin Armstrong, and he points out in the article that Armstrong called the 1987 economic crash to the very day, and he says that banks are preparing for a raft of new account fees. He said in the U.S., we're more likely than not, we're going to get negative interest rates directly passed on to consumers by the banks, who will now claim that it's the feds that are making them do it, because the feds will raise it on the banks, and then they'll say, we've got to pass those rates along to you. So you want to get your money out? You want to get your money out of the bank and put it in a mattress? Well, guess again, because we got another article up. Secret European cash limits are in place. Again, starting in Europe, they love to start these things in Europe. That's where the consolidation with the European Union started. That's where they started the euro. They used the collapse of the euro to take out elected representatives in places like Italy and Greece and replace them with Goldman Sachs bankers, where they called them technocrats. And so now we see that they're going the next step. As he points out, some of you remember the recent scandal where HSBC tried to impose cash withdrawal limits on their accounts. And this person, Mark Kempton from the BBC, says it turns out that was just a trial balloon to see if the public would object to it. These limits are already in place, and they're going to limit your cash withdrawals. They're going to say you can't take your money out. You got to keep it in there, and we're going to, of course, charge you higher fees on that. That's the way this thing is going to go down. This has been something that, and again, we're going to go to the immigration system. But before I do that, I also want to point out that this last week, of course, was the one-year anniversary of the Snowden leaks. We have an article up on InfoWars today from Washington's blog. An NSA whistleblower says that Snowden never had access to the juiciest documents. Now, this isn't just any NSA whistleblower. This was the first of the NSA whistleblowers. We've talked to William Binney here at InfoWars, and of course he was the technical head with global responsibilities, a global technical head of the NSA. We talked to him about their capabilities. He's very concerned. For a while he was saying, we're this close to a police state, holding his two fingers very close like a pinch. But now, a few months ago, he said, we are in a police state. He said for years, and he worked for the NSA for over 30 years, he said he'd monitored during his career East Germany, as well as Russia. He knows what a police state looks like. He knows when they're monitoring their own system, their own citizens, to the extent that they are in this system, what that brings about. And he said, that's what we're doing here. We've had several NSA whistleblowers prior to Snowden that were very, very concerned when they saw the surveillance turn inward. Now, in this article that's up on InfoWars, what Tice was saying was one of the very first things that people would be told when they started to work for the NSA was the #1 rule is that because of FISA, you do not ever spy on American citizens. That's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. You had to get special court permissions from a secretive court, the FISA court. That, of course, was created in response to the revelations that came out of the Frank Church Committee hearings in the 1970s, talking about CIA abuses. People were very concerned about the CIA and other intelligence organizations turning on the American people and creating a police state domestically. These organizations that were created to protect us from foreign enemies. Remember what Madison said. He said, if tyranny ever comes to America, it will come, tyranny and oppression, it will come in the guise of fighting a foreign enemy. That is what the NSA is doing. We've talked about that in conjunction with the asymmetric warfare groups and their training for take over American cities. We've talked about the militarization of the police and using the military as police. Well, that is especially true of these NSA-type documents. That is where we're going. Now, this is an article where Tice is talking about what Snowden did not have access to. And he, quite frankly, says that he believes that the NSA is spying on and blackmailing top government officials and military officers, including Supreme Court justices, highly ranked generals, Colin Powell, other State Department personnel, and many other top officials. And of course, I've said many times, I firmly believe that when you look at the bizarre decision that Justice Roberts came out with, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, writing both the dissenting and agreeing opinion enabling Obamacare, that dramatic 180-degree turnaround, and writing both sides of the opinion, first disagreeing with it and then all of a sudden agreeing with it, I believe, and many other people have also believed, that he was blackmailed. This is a fellow, Robert Tice, was the very first of the NSA whistleblowers. He was even before William Binney and Thomas Drake and others who came after him. And when he came out, he was part of a group. Now, he was not a technical head as William Binney was in terms of looking at the programs, but what he was concerned about was still domestic espionage. He was concerned about the fact that there was a separate higher group within the NSA that had access to documents that the rest of the NSA did not have. And he says in this article, it is very compartmentalized. Even with the stuff they had, you might have something at the NSA where there's literally only 40 people that know that it's going on in the entire agency. He's saying that when they're doing these criminal actions, it's very similar to the types of things that J. Edgar Hoover was pulling on officials that we now know for many, many decades, controlling them, blackmailing them. Hoover had nothing like the NSA's capabilities. It would be very frightening to think what he would have done, and yet human nature is human nature. There's nothing that unique about J. Edgar Hoover. To think that there aren't many J. Edgar Hoovers within the NSA, whenever you give the government that kind of capability, they will use it. And he points that out here in his article. He says the information that they got about the fact that they, even at the time of the Church hearings, the NSA was wiretapping Frank Church and other senators, and they got those documents by accident. And he says when they're covering that stuff up, they are not going to put it on PowerPoint displays, which is the kind of stuff that Snowden has got. So even though Snowden had top secret clearance, there's another level above that, and we should be very concerned about that.
Okay, so now you have that opinion that the giant Snowden leaks that Greenwald is building an empire on might not be all that special. And, of course, we haven't learned anything new from him. And, of course, again, they haven't put anybody behind bars that needs to be behind bars, have they? Well, also kind of snuck in that report on banks planning to charge negative interest there. I knew you'd get a kick out of that. Well, we're going to play another cut. This time, it had to happen with all the charities contributing to, 9/11 first responders and families and all that. somebody had to come along and commit a fraud. So we have a 9/11 disability fraud that we're going to tell you about today. Actually, Abby Martin. Oh, we don't quite have it set up, but we will any second now. I'm going to also go on to talk a little bit about Fukushima and the latest cover-up that we're doing. I'll come back after the 9/11 part, and then we'll go into the Fukushima. And a couple minutes on the war on poverty. Just last month was the anniversary of the war on poverty. 50th anniversary? 50th? Something like that. Yeah. Anyway, so we're ready to play this one, and I'll come back in about 10 minutes.
It's been over 12 years since 9/11. What happened that day has left a lasting impact worldwide. But perhaps none are more affected than the thousands of first responders that selflessly rushed to ground zero in search for survivors. Over 1,000 9/11 first responders have already died from cancer and other related illnesses as a result of breathing in the highly toxic asbestos dust from the pulverized buildings. Dust that the government knew to be dangerous, yet assured the people of New York was perfectly safe so Wall Street could get back up and running. According to the second annual report released in November by the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund, only about 1% of the first responders who have filed for claims have so far received financial help. Although the corporate media has mostly ignored the plight of the first responders and the 9/11 cover-up as a whole, amazingly, they're finally picking up the story.
Some retired New York City police officers and firefighters lied about health problems after the attacks of 9/11 to get millions of dollars in federal disability benefits.
Among those charged, Luis Hurtado, who prosecutors say was starring in instructional videos as a 6th-degree black belt, all while telling the New York Police Department he was disabled with neck injuries and psychological problems.
The accused include 72 former NYPD cops as well as city firefighters and correction officers. Many reportedly cited post-traumatic stress from the 9/11 attacks for their inability to work.
Yep, instead of focusing on the insane struggles the dying first responders face today, the media has chosen to put all the attention on a couple dozen who have allegedly frauded the fund. Great job, guys. Well, earlier I spoke with someone who's been researching 9/11 for years. His name is John Gold. He's an author and investigative journalist. I first asked him why he thinks the media is latching onto a story about 9/11 fraud rather than 9/11 illness.
Well, the government lied about the air and water quality down around Ground Zero, and as a result, thousands of 9/11 first responders have gotten sick. Over 1,000 have died. The founder of the Feel Good Foundation, John Feel, posts news what seems like every week of a 9/11 first responder dying. No one was held accountable for these lies, and it's essentially an issue that they don't want us to dwell on.
Yeah, it's easier to just talk about a couple people frauding the system than the massive cover-up with that health-related issue. John, let's talk about an even bigger story when it comes to 9/11, which is the cover-up, specifically the latest regarding Saudi Arabia's complicity and the CIA's foreknowledge of it. To what extent do we know that Saudi Arabia was involved logistically and financially backing the hijackers in the U.S.?
Well, I think we need to release the 28 redacted pages of the Joint Congressional Inquiry to find out. This is something that the families have been fighting for years. And right now, I believe Representatives Stephen Lynch and Walter Jones have written a resolution asking Obama to release those 28 redacted pages. Kristen Brautweiser, one of the famous Jersey girls, asked Obama to his face to release those 28 redacted pages. He said he would look into it and get back to her. One thing about those 28 redacted pages is they're just the tip of the iceberg. The 9/11 Commission has yet to release all of their documents, and the documents that they have released are greatly redacted.
And how much did the government know beforehand about this operation?
Well, there's a multitude of information out there that suggests this government knew what was coming. One of the Jersey girls talked about how they met whistleblowers in Maryland, people that the 9/11 Commission refused to subpoena, and they essentially had information that showed this government knew the day, the target, and the type of attack.
Unbelievable.
What does that say?
What does that say exactly? I mean, considering how we now know also that 2 of the hijackers were living under the roof of an FBI informant, John, do you think it's possible that U.S. intelligence agencies weren't just turning a blind eye to the operation, but intimately involved in it?
I certainly do. I recommend reading the book Disconnecting the Dots by Kevin Fenton, which essentially makes the case that the CIA was seemingly protecting those 2 hijackers in San Diego. I also recommend the works of Ray Novoselsky, Rory O'Connor, and John Duffy, which elaborate on this issue.
And what are some other things that they say in the books that we should know about? Can you summarize any of it?
Well, they talk about how a CIA agent supposedly sent a memo that talked about how these hijackers entered the country, and they never sent this memo, but they lied about it and said that they did. This is just one of the things that they talk about.
A lot of lies, John, that's for sure. It seems like lies everywhere you look. The 9/11 Commission report also said that the funding behind these terrorist attacks were of little practical significance. That's actually an exact quote. John, is that true?
Well, as I said, Prince Bandar's wife is allegedly connected to money of those 2 hijackers in San Diego. I think that's significant, don't you?
If the funding were exposed, where do you think it would trace back to other than just Bandar?
Well, I think it would lead back to certain Saudi royals. I think it would lead back to elements within the Pakistani ISI as well.
What makes you think that?
Well, there's been news for years showing that, well, the Pakistani ISI, Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed ordered Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh to wire transfer $100,000 to Mohammed Atta,
the lead hijacker. And wasn't that guy having breakfast with the Bush administration on the morning of 9/11?
Well, he met with George Tenet in the months before 9/11. He met with certain Pentagon officials during the week of 9/11. He met with people within the White House. He met with Porter Goss, Bob Graham, Senator Kyle, during the time of 9/11. So yes, that's the same guy.
Interesting. What did the government do to cover up Saudi Arabia's role after the fact?
Well, the Bush administration and the Obama administrations did as much as they could to make sure that the courts sided with the Saudis over the 9/11 families. And I think that's disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful.
What did they do to side with the Saudis instead of the families?
Well, for instance, as I said, Kristen Brottweiser asked Obama to release those 28 redacted pages. He said he would look into it and never got back to her. Alina Kagan, on behalf of the Obama administration, filed a brief with the Supreme Court, I believe, if I remember correctly, asking them to protect the Saudis to make sure that they could not be sued. That's just one of the things that they've done.
And of course, you know, flying out the family, and they claim that bin Laden was the black sheep. Of course, we know that that isn't true also. What's your response to people who say that the cover-up was just a cover-up of the incompetence of the administration for not acting on the warnings, John?
The Bush administration was anything but incompetent. They wanted war, they got it. They wanted to make billions for their corporate friends, they did. They wanted to expand executive power, they did that as well. They committed crime after crime after crime during their time in office and essentially remained Teflon coated throughout. They were anything but incompetent as far as I'm concerned.
And, you know, I know Bob Graham is obviously outspoken about this Saudi cover-up, but why do you think not more members of Congress are putting their hands up in the air and saying, hold on, I mean, we have the entire foreign policy agenda and domestic policy based on this event, John? I mean, this is a pretty shocking cover-up going on.
Well, you know as well as I do that many people in Washington, D.C. are essentially bought and paid for. 9/11 has been used disgracefully to do a number of things over the years. You know, it's used to justify the warrantless wiretapping, the torture, the drone attacks, to help essentially the military-industrial complex. So, you know, many in D.C. work within the military-industrial complex, so it's not in their interest to do so.
What does it say, lastly, John, about the fact that our government was aware of Saudi Arabia's involvement, at the very least, chose to completely ignore it and cover it up, and that Saudi Arabia remains to this day to be the closest ally to this country in the Middle East?
Saudi Arabia and the United States have been partners in crime for years. It does not surprise me at all that the United States would cover up Saudi Arabia's involvement. You know, we would be foolish to in 2010, WikiLeaks said that Saudi Arabia was still the chief financiers of Al-Qaeda. We would be foolish to think that the United States was not aware of this, and yet we've sold them billions in weapons and so on and so forth. This is another thing that's absolutely disgraceful.
And of course, they're a horrendous human rights abuser as well. John Gold, amazing to have you on, author, investigative journalist. Everyone check out the timeline, History Commons. That's what you said to me earlier. Really great research there. Thanks again for coming on, John.
Thank you very much, Abby, for having me on today.
Yeah, John Gold, I highly recommend that you check out the videos that he's posted. He has a channel on YouTube, and they sure covered an awful lot in that, and it's nothing that we haven't said before, but it brings it all into a real close focus, just how much corruption is going on. And you always see things like, people calling George Bush stupid, or calling Reagan, a dummy, or senile, or, Alzheimer's. But that's not true. They accomplished exactly what they set out to accomplish. And somebody who accomplishes what they set out to accomplish is not incompetent. Okay? So people have to realize that. It's not, stop believing in the coincidence theory, that everything happens by coincidence. It's just a coincidence, right? No, it's by plan. And if you don't understand that, well, we ran out of time. I don't have time to play the Fukushima one. So what we're going to do is, there's one that I really want to play. It's Alex Jones, and the title of this one is Proof That We Run Al-Qaeda. Now, he sums up what we're doing in Syria and the Middle East and all that. And pay attention, because we've been talking about, how Al-Qaeda is, the thug that we in the glass company hire to go breaking windows at night. So the military-industrial complex can stay in business because they send out this boogeyman that we have to all fight. And, we'll just go ahead and... This is 22.5 minutes, so we'll just barely come back with enough time to say goodbye. So watch this. This is a great one.
Friday the 13th, 2014 has turned out to be a horrible day for Iraq, a terrible day for Syria, the Middle East, and the rest of the world, and especially the Christians of Iraq. They're having their heads chopped off or are being shot in the back of the head, and the images are showing up in international newscasts worldwide of Christian men, women, and children having their heads hacked off. 800,000 fleeing Baghdad to Crete and other cities. Major cities across the nation of Iraq have fallen to the ISIS Al-Qaeda group, publicly funded by NATO, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the United States, and France in the last 3.5 years, attacking Libya, Syria, and our ally Egypt. This is part of a long-term deal with Saudi Arabia to turn the entire Middle East over to the Sunni-based Wahhabist system. Now, to understand what's happening currently, we're going to, in a few minutes, go into some of the history of this, because it's hidden in plain view. But because the population doesn't know history, they're doomed to repeat it. Most Americans know Al-Qaeda was founded by the United States government. back in 1979 by Zbigniew Brzezinski. That was the name of the computer program at the CIA called the base, or in Arabic, Al-Qaeda. Fast forward, we're told they attacked us on 9/11. Al-Qaeda is a real group. They are terrorists. They're funded by Saudi Arabia. They do attack people, but they're doing it for the criminals that work in the Western governments as a destabilizing secret army to cause civil wars, stage terror attacks, so the West can take our liberties, spy on us, secretly arrest us and disappear us, torture us under the NDAA and Patriot Acts that both parties have supported. I'm going to go over some of the history and proof of that in a moment. Kurt Nimmo has a big article out tonight with all the links and proof at Infowars.com. Now, going back 3.5 years ago, Western bases in Iraq, Associated Press, Reuters, you name it, were funding radical Islamicists out of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other Wahhabist-held areas. And the media said, is it good to be funding groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda? They're not affiliated with Al-Qaeda. They are Al-Qaeda. They fly the flag of Al-Qaeda. They are Wahhabist out of Saudi Arabia. It is the exact same thing. And they've now gotten medium and heavy weapons from NATO and the West. That's what Benghazi was about, to attack Syria. That's not denied. And that's why Ted Cruz and others said we shouldn't be Al-Qaeda's air force over there. And it stopped Obama from a full-scale air bombardment to turn Syria over to the very same group that couldn't take over Syria right across the border. I'm going to go over the map in a moment, who've now raced into Iraq, been left alone, been given weapons, who are now in a modern blitzkrieg with heavy weapons and thousands of brand new Mercedes, Toyota trucks, you name it, attacking and coming in and, again, literally executing police, military. I've got all the headlines here. We're going to be putting some of those on screen. Let me just go over some of these headlines before I break down the big picture and tell you the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. AP, America's being evacuated from Iraq Air Base. Jerome Corsi's on the radio show today. Contractors contacted him. 200 of them are surrounded in a fort, in a base, by Al-Qaeda, swearing to kill them. The Al-Qaeda is real. They're being turned loose and armed by NATO. They will kill Americans. That's the #1 target. Then there'll be bigger defense budgets to fight them later. This is very sophisticated. Even the low-level Al-Qaeda folks don't know this. It's the higher levels that are in and I have government documents and articles we're going to break down showing that in a moment from 2 other conflicts. Continuing, Iraq crisis. Baghdad prepares for the worst as Islamist militants vow to capture the capital and are now entering the capital, and the police are fleeing and just throwing down their weapons because they were already run by the West and infiltrated. They've been told to basically stand down. Here's another one. ISIS butchers leave roads lined with decapitated police and soldiers. Battle for Baghdad looms as thousands answer Iraq government's call to arms and jihadists bear down on capital. This is unbelievable. The Iraqi government wasn't doing what they were told by the globalists, so now they send in Al-Qaeda. ISIS is now imposing Sharia law, just like they did in Libya, and even our own government admits Libya is much worse than it was when Gaddafi was in. The executions are just continuing by the thousands an hour. It's being reported. Al-Qaeda flags, just as in Libya, are being hoisted up everywhere. Our own government double-crossed our allies in Egypt a few years ago, removed Hosni Mubarak, who was no angel, but he had stability. Christians were at peace. You could visit the country. There was basic freedom. Compared to now, Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood were given power by the West. The military turned against that, overthrew them. Our own government has been backing Al-Qaeda, trying to overthrow and kill the Egyptian military. Remember that when you're at the airport and they want to grope your genitals because of Saudi Arabian terrorists? Remember, you're the terrorist, not them. They say the Tea Party is now the #1 enemy, not Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda has got our Air Force drones already bombing over there, supposedly against them, and it's all just for show so they can act like they're not arming them. And speaking of that, I have a couple articles that deal with that subject. This is out of the Wall Street Journal. That's also in the Daily Beast. Iraq's terrorists are becoming a full-blown army. Pentagon, Iraq rebels may have captured U.S. military equipment. The Hill, folks, they've given them the weapons in Benghazi. That's the cover-up for this. I mean, it's admitted. So there is literally a blitzkrieg taking place right now. 800,000 refugees fleeing. And oh, they got those Stinger missiles from our military bases. In Iraq, they found them on the side of the road. You found that robbed money from the bank, you know, in the back of a shoebox in the alley. I mean, this is incredible. But U.S. secretly flying drones over Iraq, but it's not stopping Al-Qaeda. Oh, this is how dumb they think everyone is. And they'll say, oh, Obama looks like a fool now that Iraq's falling apart. It's his job to look like a fool. So the establishment can put all the blame on him, and he's terrible. I don't like him. But the point is, he's just a puppet. This is all meant on the grand chessboard to turn the whole Middle East over to Saudi Arabia, just as British intelligence has been doing since 1901. That's mainline history. I'm going to break that down here in just a moment. Congress says Iraq vets are hopelessly watching as their gains are lost. They were there to kick out the secular leader Saddam Hussein, who'd been a CIA officer who was set up and told to attack Iran and Kuwait. I'm not defending him, but he was a CIA officer, not an asset. That's declassified. Look it up. He was put into power in '79, set up later to then remove him because they had women going to college and not wearing burqas and rock and roll on the radio, and put Al-Qaeda in charge of the whole region. But that was too obvious back in 2007, 8, or 9. So you've got to do it later with a Saudi Arabian proxy army, and that is in the Belfast Times mainstream news, breaking down the Saudi Arabians bragging that they have been funding the entire time the insurgency in Syria, Libya. I mean, that's on record. That's all over mainstream news 3 years ago. But they think you're dumb and don't remember that. Well, the Belfast Times, Iraq crisis, Sunni caliphate has been bankrolled by Saudi Arabia, where 15 of the 19 hijackers came from, to then attack, think about that, the country that had nothing to do with it. And now, 12 years after 9/11, 2 invasions of Iraq, 1 million dead Iraqis plus, Al-Qaeda is being given the country to murder every Christian they can get their hands on and blow up mosques of minority Muslim groups that are peaceful. And it's all meant to cause a total Sunni Shiite civil war between Iran and the proxy forces that are all over the Middle East, in Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon. This is the stated clash of civilizations, the Wolfowitz Doctrine, the Brzezinski Doctrine. It's bipartisan. This is what Wesley Clark talked about, the plan to take all these countries. You do it by civil war. What's Obama want to do now with the gun confiscation plan he announced? Australian-style total confiscation last week with an executive order they're looking at doing. They want to cause a civil war here, saying the Tea Party are terrorists. This isn't a game. This is rule by proxy army. Now let's go over some of the history of Al-Qaeda. Then I'll go to the map, show you what's currently happening. Undisputed. Lawrence of Arabia is just Hollywood's packaging of it. It really started in 1901. You can read it in the encyclopedia. They took a 200 square mile area held by some really hardcore bandits who'd been robbing caravans for thousands of years. The Wahhabists, they were bandits before they were even Muslims, before Muhammad even came along. And these are the folks where Islam started. And they were given weapons to take over from the old empire that the British were fighting in World War I, the Turks. And so during that whole period, they then sent in the Wahhabists to finally overthrow the folks that were in Syria at that time and controlling most of the Middle East. It was a British Empire takeover of the Middle Eastern Empire of the Turks. Now, fast forward, the Turks are now under British control, under globalist control, in a power-sharing deal with NATO and the EU. And so they're attacking Syria today. So it's different today. But you can go read about the history of that. So this has always gone on. Al-Qaeda didn't start in 1979 officially. It did. But it really started in 1901 under the first king of Saudi Arabia. It took him 30 years, 1901 to 1931, to take over the entire area. Now they're going to be given Iraq, Iran. They're being given everything. They're being allowed to invade and take over with jihadists as far south and west as Nigeria. I mean, Kenya, they're just shooting Christians everywhere, taking over. Again, our government financing them to kill Christians. That's the apple of their eye. The scandal's so huge, it's hiding in plain view, and no one even knows this. I want to remind you this has been done before. Airlift of Evil, November 2001, 1 month after the fake invasion of Afghanistan. Oh, our troops were getting killed fighting real Taliban, folks that didn't want to give up their property, give up their opium, and 14-year-old conscripts put in ditches to be bombed by U.S. planes who thought they were fighting Al-Qaeda. 40,000 real Al-Qaeda Taliban were put, Council on Foreign Relations, AP, Reuters, NBC, look it up, Times of London, were put and paid in gold, flown into Pakistan to start destabilizing Pakistan. And that's not just the admitted facts. General Hamid Gul, the former supreme commander of the military, the head founder of operations against the Russians in Afghanistan, exclusively comes on our show 5 separate times to confirm my analysis and to say, yes, they've put Al-Qaeda here to destabilize and stir up the folks they're affiliated with, but real Muslims who are affiliated with Wahhabist-type Sunnis, but aren't Al-Qaeda, to stir them up with drone attacks and other things so they'll overthrow our secular government. Just like they're doing it in Syria, just like they're doing it in Iraq. And then just like they use them in Europe and the U.S. to take our rights in the name of fighting the group that they control. Al-Qaeda is the secret army skeleton key meant to open every door for total control across the world. So there's the Airlift of Evil article. There it is. British Special Forces caught dressed up as Arab terrorists in 2006, 7, and 8. They got caught dressed up by Iraqi police attacking and shooting Shiites so they could cause a war between Shiites and Sunnis and get a civil war going. Again, same story, BBC, Guardian, they all had to report on that operation when it got blown wide open. So if they can't get Al-Qaeda into an area to stir stuff up, they'll dress up with the big bin Laden beards, the turban on their head, the black flags, and go do it. We've shown you photos of those guys. They had to have tanks go into the Iraqi jail and blow it up just to get these guys out, because they were being interrogated and it all came out. So that's why we know how this works. You want to make trillions off defense contracting? No bids? Put Al-Qaeda in. Sure, some of the real Al-Qaeda hate Americans and even get killed. They're dumb grunts too. They don't know the big picture. I talk to retired generals and they go, yeah, that's the plan. That's what generals really talk about, Alex. You're right. That's the great strategy. I have to talk to 3-star generals so people understand this, and it's so simple. I have conversations at night with congressmen, senators, generals, folks who are scared to come on my show, and that's fine, but who want to talk to me because they know I understand this. I'm not bragging. I don't understand why I understand all this military stuff and the general public can't figure it out. It's so simple. I mean, I just do not understand it. This is in plain view. It's totally evil. And the public's like, gee, it's terrible. A secret Al-Qaeda army with thousands of vehicles just showed up and is blitzkrieging and is taking major cities and is about to take Baghdad on Friday the 13th. How did they do it? Why do they have American arms? Oh, it sucks. They picked them up on the ground. This is insane. It shows the globalist. This is the beginning of World War III through proxy wars. Just like they put Nazis in control of Ukraine, overthrew it. Obama called it duly elected. And then when the Russians fight back, they're terrorists. I'm not siding with the Russians, but they're not doing all this. It's incredible how dangerous this is. World War II started with proxy wars. World War I started with proxy wars. I have been having dread, as you know, with all the stuff we see, but also in my gut, folks. And I think this weekend is going to be very serious. We need to be watching this very closely. Iran is saying they're going to send troops in. They've already sent in 3 brigades into Iraq, right over their border. I want to play Ted Cruz and Rand Paul warning about this 6 months ago. And we came together and stopped the open bombardment of Syria to put Al-Qaeda fully in charge and kill every Christian in the country. Literally. They're blowing up churches still every week there. This is a civil war across the Middle East. I want to go over to the map and break this down for you here in the new InfoWars studios. Please pray for InfoWars, this operation as well. We're right at the tip of the spear. The eye of Sauron, of the globalist, is looking right at us. Because in the dark of the night, as the tyranny comes in, the light, the truth, like a candle on a hilltop, shines as a beacon. And InfoWars is a beacon. And I am very humble and try to do the very best job I can. And I want to thank you all for your prayers and for the fact that you've helped us be so successful together in this fight against the tyrants. Let's go to Ted Cruz and Rand Paul.
We should be focused on defending the United States of America. That's why young men and women sign up to join the military, not to as you note, serve as Al-Qaeda's Air Force.
It's hard to argue that the Syrian rebels that you will be arming are not associated forces of Al-Qaeda. Are they not fighting on the same side of a war? Can you argue there's no connection between them, that really this is a three-way war? I know that's the way we're trying to break it down. I don't think it's that easy to say that. I think it's impossible to say that the Syrian rebels are not associated with Al-Qaeda. So there is a great irony that you will be arming forces that a normal common sense use of the word associated can say that these people are associated with Al-Qaeda. That's all. Thank you.
Again, 3 years ago, InfoWars was one of the only media outlets pointing out that Al-Qaeda was really a secret army of NATO and the globalists to destabilize the whole world and bring in tyranny as the response to it, like something out of a Revenge of the Sith episode. Ladies and gentlemen, now that's well known all over the world. That's mainstream news, but only on the Syria issue. We expose it in Iraq, that will shut down the entire operation. And again, I want there to be sovereign nations. I don't want to have one global power bloc that takes over Russia and takes over Iran, especially if it's the Saudi Arabians, the worst in the Middle East, their government, not their people, that are going to run it all. I mean, no, I'm not a villain. InfoWars isn't about chilling with villains, and I know you're not as Americans. So let me just explain this. Once you see the map, it'll be easy to understand for new viewers. And send this on to the prostitute media, the dinosaur media. Explain it to them. Most of them know they're just whores and are going along with this evil. You were aiding and abetting Al-Qaeda. Understand that. Now, you know about Iraq, you know about the overthrow, put Saddam in 79, tell him to attack Iran, set him up, tell him to attack Kuwait in 1990, tell him he can go ahead and do it. He does it. They invade. Not saying he's a good guy, but he was CIA. Who put him in there? Who sets this up for turmoil and destabilization? Now, fast forward the last 4 years. Egypt wouldn't go along with overthrowing its neighbor, Libya. So what did they do there? They overthrew that government, put the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda in to move weapons into Benghazi in the east of Libya to then start the larger overthrow. Now it's under Sharia law, under Al-Qaeda control. The Al-Qaeda flag flies in most cities there. That's on record. We showed you those articles. Mainstream news admits that. Okay, so our government bombarded Libya and did all that to put Al-Qaeda in charge. It's just continuing. Then, since Egypt didn't play ball, again, they helped put them in there, but the Egyptian military threw them out. Because I guess they're bad. They don't like Al-Qaeda, like me. Now, let's continue. Then we've got, over here, you've got Iraq, you've got Syria, you've got Jordan, you've got areas of Lebanon, Israel, all of this going on. Now, right here in western Iraq, in the last 3 years, the U.S. military and contractors were told to give weapons, missiles, you name it, to Syrian Al-Qaeda rebels to go across and attack Syria. They want to create a new country, this ISIS group, in between Syria and Iraq. A new Wahhabist Saudi Arabian cancer satellite right here out of part of Syria and part of Iraq. Eastern Syria, western Iraq. Okay? Breaking the country up. But instead, they're just going for it all. Probably to end up cutting the country in two, which was one of the Pentagon plans, to make this part of Saudi Arabia, see Saudi Arabia? Boom, part of Saudi Arabia. And then, again, carving out their own little operation right in here. That's what they get, is they get their own little kingdom for doing this, and then Saudi Arabia gets all this. It'll all be the same thing. Okay, well, Iran doesn't like that because they're the Muslim minority, Shiite, about 19%. This is about 79% Sunni, and Wahhabists are the enforcers of that. 15 of the hijackers come from here, we attack Iraq. Now the people that supposedly attacked us on 9/11, we take over Iraq for them. You understand how evil this is? So this is a proxy war. And this is meant to take down Iran, Russia, everybody else. This is the elected Iraqi government not doing anything to us. It's being overthrown by a NATO, Saudi Arabia, Obama, globalist-backed regime. That is the total plan to then break this into turning it into a Saudi Arabian state, taking over Syria, turning it into a Saudi Arabian state, or at least getting piece of it if they can't get the whole country, while killing every Christian they find in tolerant Syria, tolerant Iraq, killing every Christian they can get their hands on, which the progressives in this country, the anti-Christian people, for some reason, love, and all the whore, right-wing, fake Christian folks won't even talk about or discuss. This is how sick it is. And when you go to the airport, they want to stick their hands down your pants to see if Al-Qaeda's in there, or check your baby's diaper to see if Al-Qaeda or bin Laden's in there. Meanwhile, they publicly run them, and the media is all acting like they don't know what's going on. Gee, this army, this blitzkrieg, just attacked and took over. We don't know where they came from. They were armed right here on the border with Syria. You go up here to Turkey, they've got Al-Qaeda training camps on record invading Syria. Al-Qaeda's being given bases everywhere, just like they were in Pakistan by the CIA. The CIA doesn't work for America, folks. It works for special globalist monopoly interest. Now, that's our breakdown. This report is very important. This humanitarian crisis is just so massive right now. And they're also taking Saudi Arabian Wahhabists into areas of Sudan and other areas while claiming they're fighting radical Islam, and going into the rest of Africa, into Kenya, all the way over to the western coast of Nigeria. These groups work for the globalist. Not our government, criminal groups above it. And it's a fact. You now have been given exactly what's happening on this Friday the 13th.
It's a fact. And I challenge you, don't take his word for it. Pick out any part of that last clip and look up the facts and see if they jive with what he was saying. And I guarantee you they do. I've already done that. I learned a long time ago to double check everything. Every once in a while something gets through, but I'm only human. But now think about this. As he brought up, we've known for a long time that Saudi Arabia funded a lot of the 9/11 terrorist attack, at least the Patsy side of it. And so what did we do? Attack Afghanistan. All right. We knew that there were, 15 of the 19 supposed hijackers were Saudis. So what did we do? Attack Iraq. All right. What great logic. I mean, people have to think that our government is stupid. But it's not stupid. It thinks you're stupid. It thinks that our government thinks that it can say anything it wants to you and me, and we'll just go our merry way. Meh, meh. Well, if you stop and think about it, they were talking about the Muslim Brotherhood. That's a creation of MI6. And they use it just like we use Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is a creation of the CIA. Bin Laden was on the CIA payroll after 9/11, up to, including, and after 9/11. So now we've got, religious conflict, killing Christians everywhere. You realize that the power elites don't really care about religion one way or the other, except as a useful tool to stir up trouble and blame things on. If you can blame things on religion, we don't know what the other guy's thinking. He must be evil. Let's go get him. Okay. Well, anyway, we'll come back next Saturday with a pre-recorded show. I'm not going to be here in person Saturday, but it'll be a good show anyway.